This is the story of Caleb, one of the 12 spies, a man of courage and a warrior who held on to a promise for 45 years. His story reminds us that faith may stand alone, but it wins in the end. The cave was darker than it should have been. Wind pressed through the cracks like whispers. Dust clung to the walls like memories. And from somewhere deep in the rock, a sound, slow and hollow, rose like a breath that refused to die. Caleb held his torch higher, his old bones steady. Behind him, Jeziel stepped carefully across the stones, his hand tight on his sword hilt. "Is this the place?" Jeziel whispered. "Yes," Caleb answered. "The same place I saw with my own eyes, 45 years ago." The air was thick, but Caleb's mind drifted, far from the cave, far from the torchlight, to another time, to another fire. He had been just a boy, 8 years old, hiding behind a woodpile while Egyptian soldiers stomped through the camp, barking orders and lashing whips. His father, Jephunneh, had grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him close. "Never forget, son," he whispered. "These men may wear armor, but they're not stronger than our God." That night, Caleb had seen something he never forgot. A Hebrew man stand between an Egyptian whip and an old woman. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He stood alone. But the next morning, that same man walked freely. The soldiers were gone. Years passed. The boy became a man, and then came the desert, and the fire, and the thunder of Sinai. Caleb had seen Moses stretch out his staff and watched the sea split like a curtain pulled back by invisible hands. He had walked through walls of water while others trembled, not because he was stronger, but because something in him had decided long ago. If God said go, Caleb wouldn't stop walking. Now, standing in the cave, he looked around at the carvings. The old ones called this the Cave of Anakim, the place where the giants once gathered. Not just large men, legends, walking fears. "You sure you want to go deeper?" Jeziel asked. "I've waited half my life to finish this," Caleb said. "But you're 85. "And not dead," he replied with a smile. He stepped deeper into the cavern. And as the torchlight moved across the walls, shapes began to form. Massive shadows, weapons, as tall as pillars, and bones. "What are those?" Jeziel asked. "The remains," Caleb said, "of what everyone once feared." He crouched beside the skull of something inhumanly large, the bone dry and brittle now. "They called them giants," he said softly, "and the people believed it." "They weren't?" "They were men," Caleb said, "big men, but fear made them bigger." He stood again and faced the dark beyond. "I've come back to finish the walk I started." "Walk where?" "To the top of Hebron," Caleb said. "Through the land they said we couldn't take. Past the ruins of lies, up the mountain of promises." He raised his torch higher. The shadows fell back. And for the first time in years, the cave began to feel smaller. Not because it changed, because he had. The sun hung low over the hill country, turning the rocks of Hebron gold and red like burning coals. The wind carried the smell of iron, dust, and wild vines. And at the base of the mountain, Caleb stood facing the city gates, his cloak snapping behind him. Hebron, the last stronghold of the Anakim, and his inheritance. "There it is," Jeziel said beside him. "Looks quiet." "That's what makes it loud," Caleb replied. "The walls were thick, built from stacked stone and sealed with bronze gates. From a distance, it looked like any other city, but Caleb could feel the weight of its history. This was where the other spies had trembled, where they had said, "We can't go in there. We'll die." Where fear had made its camp and built a fortress. But today, faith had returned to collect the keys. "You're not afraid?" Jeziel asked. "I've had 45 years to deal with fear," Caleb said. "It had its chance. Now it's my turn." He stepped forward, one pace at a time. Guards spotted them from the tower. Trumpets sounded. Shouts rang out. Arrows were notched, but none fired. Because as strange as it seemed, the city remembered him. Years ago, when Caleb and Joshua had walked this land as spies, they had entered Hebron under disguise. They'd seen the people, the warriors, the idols, the fear. And even then, Caleb had told the others, "I want this mountain." Now he was back. No disguise, no hiding, only a promise in his heart and a sword on his side. The gates creaked open. A tall man stepped out, his armor polished, his chin lifted too high. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "This land is protected." "It was promised," Caleb answered, "to me and to the people of the living God." "We are the sons of Anak," the man said. "We do not give land, we take it." Caleb drew his sword slowly. "Then try." The warrior roared and lunged. Metal crashed against metal. Jeziel gasped as sparks flew. Caleb didn't flinch. He had waited for this, trained for this, believed for this. The battle didn't last long. The warrior's blade clattered to the stones, and Caleb stood over him, not out of hatred, but victory. "This city forgot the promise," Caleb said, "but God did not." He turned to the gates. "Tell the others," he shouted. "The land is no longer cursed, it's claimed." And from that day forward, Hebron belonged to faith, not fear, to courage, not compromise, to a man who had stood alone but never lost his ground. The fire crackled low in the center of the Israelite camp, and shadows danced across the faces of the elders seated in a wide circle. Tents flapped softly in the desert wind. Beyond the hills, Hebron glowed like a torch, freshly claimed, still smoking from battle. Caleb stood before them, arms folded across his chest, his robe stained with dust and victory. But no one clapped. No one celebrated. Instead, they whispered. He moved without full approval. He didn't wait for the elders' blessing. He's 85. How much longer can he even lead? Joshua sat silently, eyes steady. He had known Caleb since they were young men in Egypt, two warriors who had seen the sea split and the sky burn. But now, he too waited. Not as a friend, but as a leader. "You defied the protocol," one elder said sharply. "Hebron wasn't cleared for action." "It was cleared by God," Caleb replied, 45 years ago. "But you should have waited for an army." "I didn't need an army," Caleb said, "just the memory of the promise." Silence, tension. Then Joshua finally spoke. "And what if your example inspires others to move on their own? What if men rush into battle without hearing from God?" Caleb turned to face him, voice calm. "Then teach them the difference between boldness and foolishness." "And how will they know?" "By the fruit." He pointed toward the distant ridge where Hebron now sat peacefully under the stars. "Was it not taken? Were we not told to possess the land?" One of the scribes muttered under his breath. Faith can be dangerous when it moves faster than tradition. Caleb heard it. And for the first time in years, he felt the weight of his own loneliness. He had fought giants, endured delay, watched friends and family die in the wilderness. And now, finally standing in the land, he was still being tested. That night he walked alone through the outskirts of camp, past quiet tents, past nervous guards, until he reached the outer edge where the land met the wild. There, by a small watchfire, sat a girl, barely 10, braiding a rope out of grass. She looked up at him and smiled. "You're the one who took the mountain," she said. "That's what they're saying," Caleb replied. "My father said you're dangerous." "He might be right. But I think you're brave." She handed him the rope braid. "It's for holding arrows. You'll need more." Caleb smiled. Because sometimes, when the elders sit in circles, the truth waits at the edge of the camp, in the hands of a child. The morning air was cool and thin, but Caleb's heart burned. He stood inside his tent, staring at the map laid across the table. Lines marked the 12 tribal allotments. Dots showed the conquered cities. But something was wrong. Hebron was missing. "Who redrew this?" he growled. The scribe in the corner, young, pale, and shaking, stammered. I was ordered to revise the tribal boundaries, sir, under council guidance." "Whose guidance?" "Elder Gariel, sir, and the sons of Shebuel. They said Hebron had been reassigned." "To who?" "To the sons of Levi." Caleb's fists curled. Hebron was a priest city now. But God hadn't promised it to Levi. He had promised it to him. He stormed from his tent, past lines of drying linen and half-packed travel carts. He reached the central tent of the elders just as they were seated around another morning fire. Joshua looked up, calm, composed, too composed. "We were about to call for you," Joshua said. "Come, sit." "I'll stand," Caleb replied. "Why is Hebron being taken from me?" The elders exchanged glances. Gariel stood. "No one is taking anything," he said. "We're rebalancing the territories. Hebron's location is more central than expected. It's a strategic point for priestly protection." "It's my inheritance," Caleb said, "given by Moses, confirmed by you, Joshua." "And we honor that," Joshua said. "But we also must think of the nation. The priests need a city. You already made your mark." Caleb took a step closer to the fire. "I waited 45 years, watched my generation die off, fought giants alone, took the mountain without delay. And now, you want to trade it away because it's convenient?" "It's complicated," Gariel said. "The people follow your example, but they also follow order." "You mean they follow fear?" Joshua stood slowly. "Enough," he said. "Caleb, you're a man of faith. Don't let anger be what you're remembered for. Then don't let compromise be yours." The fire crackled between them. No one spoke. That night, Caleb walked the ridge of Hebron alone. Again. He stood by the watchtower, looking down at the city that now belonged to him, but maybe not for long. Jeziel found him there, silent, in the wind. "They're moving in supplies," Jeziel said. "Priestly scrolls, holy dishes, planning a full transfer." Caleb didn't move. "Should we fight it?" "Not with swords," Caleb said. "Not this time." "So what now?" Caleb looked up at the stars, the same stars God had shown Abraham when he said, "I will give you this land." And quietly, Caleb spoke. "If God gave it, I don't have to claw to keep it. What he promises, he protects." Down in the city, the priests were unpacking, but what they didn't see were the fig trees drying up overnight, the wells running shallow, the wind shifting direction, and by morning, they would remember, you can't take what heaven already claimed. At first it was just small things. A tent stake refused to hold in the soil, then another. Scrolls went missing from satchels. Water pots cracked without reason, bread molded overnight. The priests in Hebron, newly settled with their silver basins and polished incense burners, blamed the weather. Then the locals, then the traders. But within days, something deeper began to spread. The well water turned sour. Children began coughing. And at the center of it all, like a silent witness, was Caleb's old stone altar. Still standing at the top of the hill, still untouched, still glowing faintly with the oil he had poured the day he claimed the city. Down in the council camp, the atmosphere had shifted. Gone was the smug certainty of Gariel and the sons of Shebuel. In its place, concern. And questions no one wanted to ask out loud. Joshua stood alone at the edge of his tent, arms crossed, staring toward Hebron as the wind carried ash-gray dust down from its heights. Behind him, the elders argued again. "We need to move the priests back out until we can investigate. They say it's the city reacting to theft. Cities don't react. It's a coincidence. We've been through this." "No," Joshua said at last, still staring toward the hill. "It's not a coincidence. It's a warning." That evening, a messenger was sent to Caleb, but he never made it. His horse returned riderless, the only thing in the saddlebag a scroll of tribal records, and a small branch from one of Hebron's fig trees, completely withered. When Joshua finally arrived at Caleb's door, he came quietly. No guards, no scrolls, only the faint weight of humility in his voice. Caleb was seated outside sharpening his old sword, not because he needed it, but because he liked the sound of stone against steel. "I knew you'd come," Caleb said without looking up. "The city is unraveling," Joshua replied. "It's not the city," Caleb said. "It's the promise underneath it." Joshua sat down beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The stars above them glittered like ancient eyes. The wind whistled through the pines that had grown wild around Hebron's ridge. Then Caleb said, "I didn't ask for a throne. I didn't ask for applause. I asked for my mountain." "I know," Joshua said, "and we gave it, but we didn't honor it." "You tried to fit God's promise into council lines," Caleb said, "but heaven doesn't follow votes." Joshua nodded slowly. "So what should we do?" Caleb stood brushing off his robe. "Clear the hill. Let the priests leave. Let Hebron breathe again." "That's all?" "No," Caleb said. "Tell them one more thing." He looked straight into Joshua's eyes. "Tell them, I'm coming back." By morning, the priests had packed their carts. The wind had calmed. The fig trees held green again, and at the top of the ridge, the stone altar still stood. Unmoved, unclaimed by anyone but the one who gave the promise. By the time Caleb returned to Hebron, the wind had shifted. The city smelled of fresh firewood, not fear. Children played again in the courtyards, and merchants reopened their stalls, hoping to forget the last few weeks like a bad dream. But not everyone had moved on. Something still lingered, not in the wind, in the records. Caleb walked into the council tent at Hebron Center, where scribes were busily rewriting tribal scrolls. The tent flaps fluttered open behind him, and every quill paused in midair. He said nothing, just stood, until one of the younger scribes spoke. "Can we help you, sir?" Caleb walked to the table. His eyes scanned the list. Territories, cities, family names. But his wasn't there, not once, not in Hebron, not in Judah's portion, not even as a footnote. "Where is my name?" he asked. The scribe blinked. "It's being processed, officially. There was some confusion when the priest moved in." "Confusion," Caleb repeated. "You mean rewriting?" He turned a scroll toward him, then another. He opened a fresh one, and this time found something worse. His name was there, but it had been crossed out, lightly. Faint enough that someone might call it a mistake, but not Caleb. He had seen scrolls rewritten before, in Egypt, in the wilderness. A name erased is a legacy removed, and that kind of attack doesn't come from swords, it comes from ink. "Who ordered this?" he asked. Silence. The scribes looked down, but one of them, a girl no older than 16, spoke up. "Elder Shibul sent word after the priest left. He said some land records had to be corrected, and that you were too old to worry about titles." Caleb's hands tightened around the scroll. "Do I look like a man who forgets what was promised?" He left the tent without waiting for an answer. That afternoon he walked the perimeter of Hebron alone, marking every pillar, every stone wall, every olive tree he had planted since claiming the land. He remembered every moment, every shovel of dirt, every battle, every prayer, and he knew this wasn't about property anymore. It was about memory, about legacy, and theft doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes it wears robes. That night, he lit 12 fires on 12 hills, one for each tribe, and sent messengers on horseback to every region. Each message was the same. "Come and witness what God promised. Come and see what still stands." 3 days later, they came. From Naphtali and Dan, from Reuben and Simeon. Even the sons of Levi returned, quietly. And Caleb stood before them, not as a warrior this time, but as a witness. He held up the scroll where his name had been crossed out. "They tried to erase me," he said, "but you cannot erase obedience. You cannot cross out what God writes in stone." He pointed to the altar behind him, to the mountain, to the people of Hebron now gathering in peace. "I didn't take this land for glory. I took it because he said it was mine." He raised the scroll high, then threw it into the fire. If a man's name is remembered only by ink, he's already forgotten. But if it's remembered by faith, it stands forever. The flames consumed the false scroll, and every tribe watched as the smoke rose over Hebron, not as erasure, but as a reminder. The letter came folded into a leather pouch, tied with twine and dusted with ash. It arrived not by courier, but by refugee. A man from Issachar rode through Hebron's gates just after sunrise, half-starved, clothes torn, eyes wild with fear. He collapsed in the market square and gasped out one word before losing consciousness. Ufra. A small farming town, northern hills, peaceful, unimportant. But what he carried changed everything. The elders gathered quickly. Caleb was already standing over the man when Jeziel rode in from the eastern ridge. What happened? Jeziel asked, breathless. He came with a message, Caleb replied, holding the letter, and a warning. They opened it slowly. The parchment was torn, but the writing was clear. Caleb, son of Jephunneh, defender of Hebron. I write not for help, but for hope. Rebels have risen in the hills. They call themselves the new judges. They claim Moses was wrong. They say the land should go to the strongest, not the faithful. They say Hebron is next. We need someone who remembers the promise before they erase it everywhere. Signed, Eliah, keeper of the stones, Ufra. The tent went silent. Even the wind paused. It could be a trap, said one elder. It could be bait to draw Caleb out, said another. Jeziel looked at Caleb. So what do we do? Caleb rolled the scroll and tucked it into his belt. We ride. He didn't wait for permission or backup. He was already saddling his horse. That afternoon, Caleb and Jeziel rode north. The hills turned greener, the air thinner. Clouds gathered like fists overhead. They passed burned fields, broken carts, scattered sandals, and then the village. Or what was left of it. Ufra had been reduced to ashes, huts blackened, tools rusting in dirt. A single olive tree split down the center like judgment itself. But beneath the ruins, carved into a stone altar, were the words, "We believed anyway." Jeziel knelt beside the stone. They didn't run. They couldn't, Caleb said. They had already taken the land in their hearts. Even fire can't burn that out. That night, as they camped on the edge of the ruins, torches flared in the hills above. Shouts echoed in the distance, rebel scouts, watching. Jeziel reached for his sword. Do we fight? Caleb didn't move. He looked at the altar again, at the carved words. We believed anyway. Then he stood, raised his hands toward the hills, and shouted, "Let them come! Let them see what faith looks like when it doesn't back down." The torches paused, then retreated, one by one. Because even rebels fear a man who doesn't fight for land. He fights for what God already gave him. When Caleb and Jeziel returned to Hebron, the gates opened without question. The guards saluted. Children ran beside their horses. Women sang songs with new verses, songs about the man who stood on ashes and turned rebellion away with nothing but courage. Inside the city, a celebration had already begun. Lamps were lit, tables set. But Caleb's eyes narrowed, because one thing was missing: Joshua. Where is he? Caleb asked. The guards looked confused. He's not here? He left 2 days ago, one said. He said he had business in Shiloh. Did he say when he'd return? No, sir. But he left a scroll for you. The scroll was sealed with wax and the mark of the elders. Caleb opened it in silence beneath the same fig tree where he had first claimed Hebron. The message read, "To Caleb, son of Jephunneh. Your strength has been unmatched. Your victories cannot be denied. But peace is more fragile than conquest. Many now look to you not just as a leader, but as a ruler. We must be careful what grows in Hebron." Joshua. Caleb let out a slow breath. Jeziel leaned against the stone wall nearby. Sounds like he's nervous. He should be, Caleb said, but not about me. The celebration that night was loud, too loud. As Caleb stood near the fire, people came with offerings, wine, fine cloth, brass tokens. One man even tried to kneel. "Stand up," Caleb said. "This city belongs to the Lord." "But you claimed it," the man said. "You fought the giants. You crushed the rebellion. And who gave me the strength to do it? Still, you should lead us, not just Hebron, all of Judah." The words hung in the air like smoke. More people nodded. A murmur started. Caleb for judge. Caleb for prince. Jeziel pulled him aside. "They mean it," he said. "You could take Joshua's place." "I don't want Joshua's place," Caleb answered. "I want my portion and peace." "But they trust you more than the elders." "Then someone needs to remind them where my trust lies." That night, Caleb climbed to the top of the city wall with a ram's horn in his hand. He blew it once. Loud. Every house fell silent. People poured into the square. Caleb stood tall above them and said, "I did not come here to rule you. I came to remind you. I waited 45 years for this mountain, not to build a throne, but to build an altar. This land was given by God, so if you try to crown me, you insult the one who gave it." He paused. Let that sink in. Then lifted the ram's horn again and shouted, "There is only one king in Hebron, and he does not sleep." The crowd stayed silent, not because they were afraid, but because they remembered. The next morning, the gates of Hebron opened not to a traitor or traveler, but to a ghost from the past. His name was Middai, a former spy, one of the 10 who had stood with Caleb and Joshua in the valley of Eshcol, then turned their backs and spread fear among the people. Caleb hadn't seen him in decades. Everyone had assumed he died in the wilderness with the rest, but now he stood at the city gates, older, thinner, his skin drawn tight like parchment, and his eyes hidden beneath a deep hood. Jeziel spotted him first and called for the guards. "Who are you?" they asked. The man pulled back his hood. "I'm one of the 12, he said, "and I've come to speak to Caleb." The news reached Caleb while he was repairing a stone wall along the city's southern edge. He wiped his brow and said nothing for a long time. Then, "Bring him." They met inside a small side chamber. No audience, no guards. Just 2 old men with years between them like cracked earth. Caleb folded his arms. "You have dust on your sandals and guilt in your eyes. Why are you here?" Middai didn't meet his gaze. "I heard the land obeyed you," he said, "that you fought the giants and the city bowed to your faith. You didn't come all this way for compliments." "No," Middai said. "I came to offer a warning." That caught Caleb's attention. "A warning about what?" "About your influence," Middai said. "Men are whispering again, not in fear this time, but in worship. They call you the last of the faithful. They say God speaks through you alone." "I've never claimed that." "You didn't have to." Caleb's jaw tightened. "If they lift me too high, I'll kneel lower." "Will they?" Middai said. "You can't control what men believe once they've tasted miracles, and if they believe you're their only hope, they'll forget who gave it," Caleb whispered. Middai stepped forward. "I came because I once helped twist the people's minds. I watched as they believed the worst, and we lost 40 years to sand and sorrow." "So now you want to fix it?" "I want to stop it from happening again," Middai said. I don't want your name to be the next idol they build." There was silence. Then Caleb stepped forward and placed a hand on Middai's shoulder. "I never hated you," he said. "I pitied you. But I thank you for coming. So what will you do?" "I will remind them," Caleb said. "Of what?" "That I'm not the reason we're here." That night, Caleb stood at the city gates and called for a gathering. Under the stars, with the wind brushing the walls and the altar behind him, he raised his voice again. "You see me," he said, "but it was never about me. It was never about the spies or the swords or the strategy. It was always about the God who waited for us, even when we didn't wait for him. Don't build your faith on my story. Build it on the one who never broke a promise." And somewhere in the back of the crowd, Middai nodded, because this time he believed. It began with the birds. They flew low that morning, circling strangely above Hebron's eastern watchtower, then vanishing over the mountains as if chased. Then came the wind, hot, heavy, unnatural. By midday, clouds stacked over the hills like thunder had been gathering for years, waiting to crash all at once. Jeziel stood on the southern ridge, eyes narrowed, cloak flapping behind him. "I've never seen a storm move like this," he said. Caleb said nothing. His hand gripped the city's stone wall, feeling a vibration in the rock. The people began to gather, mothers herding children inside, merchants pulling down booths, guards shouting orders, and then the sky roared. It wasn't lightning that struck first, it was hail. Chunks the size of fists crashed down onto Hebron, shattering clay pots, denting bronze shields, splitting trees, and with it came a flood of water, crashing down the hills like a river that had forgotten it needed a channel. But it wasn't just water. It was directional. The storm moved strangely, skipping homes, knocking down one gate but leaving another untouched. "This doesn't feel natural," Jeziel shouted. "It's like it's choosing where to fall." Caleb turned slowly toward the northern wall, and his eyes widened. The storm was focused on one section, the northern wall. The wall where the priests had once tried to claim their stronghold, the very place where false scrolls had been stored. "It's testing the places we built wrong," Caleb whispered. "What do? We watch and we wait." As the flood pressed harder, the wall groaned. Stone cracked. A column began to tilt, and then it stopped. The water split, diverted, flowed around the outer ring of Hebron without breaching the heart of the city. Not a single home inside the boundary was touched. Only the broken scroll room. Only the scribe tent where the false records were once written. By nightfall, the storm was gone. The stars returned. And the people emerged in silence, stepping over puddles and scattered debris. They had no songs, just awe. Caleb walked the wall with Joshua, who had returned during the storm. "Do you think it was judgment?" Joshua asked. "I think it was memory," Caleb replied. "God doesn't forget what's built in his name, but without his blessing." "And now?" Caleb looked at the altar still standing. "Now we rebuild with truth." The next morning, the people brought stones, not to repair the scribe tents or the broken gates, but to reinforce the altar. One family brought cedar, another clean linens. Children placed smooth stones they'd found in the fields, carefully stacking them at the altar's base. Not one person complained, not one argued, because even storms can preach. The trumpets sounded before the messenger even reached the gate. Not the sharp, panicked blasts of battle, but the drawn-out, golden hum of royalty. A tall man in scarlet robes entered Hebron on a white mare, flanked by scribes and attendants carrying scrolls stamped with the seal of the king. The people parted quickly. Jezreel ran to find Caleb, who was tending fig trees along the western slope. "You won't believe who's here." "Try me," Caleb said, not looking up. "The king's court, from Jerusalem, and they're asking for you." The royal envoy waited in the city square. He was young, clean-faced, soft hands. He bowed as Caleb approached. "Caleb, son of Jephunneh," he said, "hero of Hebron, man of unmatched legacy. I bring you greetings from King Huram." "Speak plainly," Caleb said. "I don't need titles, just truth." The envoy smiled. "The king is assembling a council of war advisors, men of reputation, of vision. He wishes for you to leave Hebron and serve beside him, in Jerusalem, permanently." A murmur swept through the watching crowd. Jezreel's eyes widened. "You could advise the king, shape the nation." "I already helped shape something," Caleb said. "A city, from blood and obedience." "There's more than land, Caleb," the envoy said. "There's legacy. Your name could be carved in marble beside Solomon's, statues, scrolls, stories passed down for generations." Caleb turned slowly to the altar, still standing, still stained with the oil from the day he took the city. "Let me ask you a question," Caleb said, locking eyes with the envoy. "Do you know why I claimed this land?" "Because it was promised to you." "Number?" "Because it was forgotten. Everyone else backed away. I didn't." He stepped closer. "And now you want to reward me by taking me away from it?" The envoy hesitated. "We only ask that you let the king honor you." "I don't need honor from men who weren't there when I stood alone," Caleb said. "The people of Hebron saw, God saw. That's enough." The envoy looked disappointed. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a golden band, a circlet for the head. Simple, elegant, deadly. "At least try it on," he said. Caleb held it in his hands for a moment, then slowly he placed it on the altar and stepped back. "If any crown fits, it must fit there first. Let the fire test it." The crowd gasped as the circlet sat upon the altar. Nothing happened. Then, a spark, a flame. The crown glowed, twisted, bent slightly, and cracked, then turned black. Caleb didn't flinch. "I guess it wasn't made for this mountain." The envoy bowed low, this time with trembling hands, and left, without another word. That night, Jezreel sat beside Caleb on the ridge. "You could have ruled beside a king." "I already do," Caleb replied, gazing at the stars. The early morning mist rolled through Hebron like a quiet question. It curled around stone steps and rooftops, wrapping the city in a hush. Everything was still, except the flicker of oil lamps glowing in the windows. At the highest point of the city, beside the altar he had built, Caleb stood still, clutching his side. His breath was short, his knees stiff. For the first time in years, the man who had defied giants felt fragile. "You all right?" Jezreel asked as he approached. "Just a crack in the old armor," Caleb said with a weak smile. "You want me to fetch the healer?" "Number. Just bring me a chair." He sat beside the altar, hands resting on his knees, watching as the sun crept over the ridge. The mountain had changed over time. new homes, new families, laughter where there had once been fear. But Caleb's eyes were drawn not to what had been added, but what had stayed. The altar. Unmoved, unshaken, unforgotten. A child ran past with a sheepish grin, chased by a dog and laughter. Another climbed halfway up the hill to lay a basket of fresh figs by the altar. No ceremony, no words, just a quiet offering. Caleb's throat tightened. Jeziel sat down beside him. "You ever wonder if it was worth it?" Jeziel asked. "All the years? The waiting? The fights?" "No," Caleb said, "because it's not about what I saw in my lifetime. It's about what they will believe in theirs." He motioned toward the children. "Faith doesn't retire," Caleb continued. "It's not something you pass off like a robe. It burns. And if it burns long enough, it catches the next torch." Jeziel nodded slowly. "But what if they forget?" Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Then we remind them. Not with speeches, but with the stones we leave behind." That evening, Caleb called for the elders. He was slower now, his voice gravelly, his steps careful, but his eyes still sharp with purpose. In front of the entire city, he stood on the altar steps one last time. "When I was 40, he said, I believed we could take the land. When I was 85, I climbed a mountain alone to prove it. And now, as I near the end of this race, I tell you this, the promise was never about a city, or a wall, or a name in a scroll." He looked toward the young ones. "It was about whether we'd trust God enough to still be standing when the smoke cleared." He turned to Jeziel. "You stood with me." "Yes." "Then I ask you, will you keep standing when I'm gone?" Jeziel didn't answer at first. He walked up beside Caleb, placed a hand on the altar, and nodded. "Until the end." Caleb smiled. His bones ached. But his faith still burned. The night was restless. No wind, no voices, just silence and the pounding of Caleb's heart. He lay still in his bed, staring up at the ceiling of his stone home. His joints ached. His eyes were dry, but something stirred in him, something calling. Then he heard it. Not a voice in the room, a voice in the dream, a mountain, a fire, a whisper. "Return to where you first believed." He sat up, gasping. Jeziel, sleeping by the door, jolted awake. "What is it? A noise?" Caleb shook his head slowly. "Number A summons." "From who?" Caleb looked toward the dark window, where the first stars began to fade. "From the one who gave the mountain." By sunrise, he was on the road, staff in hand, cloak over his shoulders, sandals strapped with worn leather. Jeziel tried to follow, but Caleb stopped him at the gates. "This is a walk I must take alone. But what if something happens?" "Then let it," Caleb said. "If I don't come back, you'll know where I went." "Where?" Caleb smiled. "To the edge of the promise." He walked into the wilderness, past the fig groves, past the ridges where he'd once hidden from giants, past the boulders that still bore the scratch marks of ancient battles. He walked backward through time. By midday, he reached a place few had dared return to, the Valley of Eshcol, where the spies had gathered grapes on poles, where 10 men chose fear, where Caleb had first stood alone. The vine still grew there, wild and thick, twisted, sweet. He knelt beside one and placed his palm on the dirt. "I'm still here," he whispered. "I still believe." The wind picked up. Leaves danced around his shoulders, and again the whisper, "Lift your eyes." He stood and turned. A ridge rose in the distance, sharp, jagged, glowing faintly in the midday sun. He walked toward it slowly. At the top, a flat stretch of stone waited, and there, in the middle of it, was a single unmarked altar, no name, no carvings, no ashes, untouched. "Why here?" Caleb asked aloud. And the answer came, not as words, but in his spirit. "Because you trusted me when no one else did. And now, you will give back what you held." He understood. This was where his faith would rest, not in Hebron's gates, not in scrolls. Here, where it had first begun. Caleb knelt, took the last of his oil, and poured it over the altar stone. Then he pressed his palm into the oil and left a handprint, a mark, his final testimony. He didn't weep, he didn't speak, he just closed his eyes and let the sun touch his face. And in that moment, the wind slowed, the birds quieted, and it felt like heaven bowed low to meet him. Far away in Hebron, Jeziel looked toward the hills and whispered, "He made it." The next morning in Hebron felt strangely silent. Birds sang softly, children played, life moved as usual. But something in the air had changed. Jeziel stood at the city gate looking out over the land. He had risen early, checking the horizon, waiting for a figure to appear on the ridge. But the ridge remained still. No movement, no shadow, no Caleb. By midday, the elders gathered at the altar. No one had called them, but each man felt the same pull, the same weight, as if a page had turned in a story they didn't want to end. Jeziel approached the altar with slow steps. On it sat Caleb's staff, laid gently across the stones. Beside it, tucked beneath a smooth stone, was a folded piece of parchment. Jeziel opened it. It was not a farewell. It was a charge to the people of the promise. "I was young when I believed. I was old when I received. And I was never disappointed by the God who gave the word. Don't let the noise of crowds drown out the voice of heaven. Don't trade mountains for comfort. Don't follow men who only walk when the path is easy. If God gives you something, stand for it, even if no one stands with you. Faith may stand alone, but it wins in the end. Now, take your mountain." There was no signature, but they didn't need one. The words bore the weight of a man who lived them. That evening, Jeziel gathered the young men and women of the city, not for a feast, not for a funeral, but for a walk up the ridge to the altar, where they laid their own stones, one by one. Not because they were forced, but because they understood. They were part of the same story. Years passed. And whenever a traveler came through Hebron, they were shown a simple hill with no grave. Just an altar, a staff, and a handprint carved into stone, worn smooth by time but never erased. Children would ask, "Who was he?" And the people would smile and say, "He was the man who didn't flinch. He was the man who took the mountain. He was the man who stood alone and never fell. He was the man who took the mountain. He was the man who stood alone and never fell."